Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be working on this vintage brass New York Central locomotive by Tenshodo. I believe this locomotive is an F3 locomotive, and I picked it up in a lot with a whole bunch of other locomotives on eBay, all being sold as parts or repair. And as you can see, this engine's a little rough around the edges. I believe it was made in about the 1950s, and for its time, it must have been a pretty fancy locomotive considering it has actual grills. Now, unlike a lot of locomotives which I work on, this one actually does run to some extent. It's pretty rough. It's doing some funny things which I haven't seen before. It's actually bouncing up and down on the track, so I don't really know what's going on there. But ultimately, we have all the parts. It's all intact, so I think we've got a pretty good shot at getting it going, and as I mentioned, it already does run to some extent. I'll show you all what it's doing, that way you can see for yourselves, and yeah, then we'll see if we can make this thing ride the rails once again. I know some of you who watch the channel have already seen this locomotive before, but if you haven't, this is currently what it's doing right now. Get it all set up on the track, and give it a little bit of power. You can see, it does start up, but now it sounds like it's spun its drive. Now the motor doesn't start. So it's clearly got some problems with the drive, as well as maybe some electrical issues, but it's still a terrific start. I've had some engines where you get nothing from the motor, so it's not that bad. I really just think it needs some work, and a lot of these older locomotives have problems too. Like you can see the wheels are pretty oxidized and the lubricants are likely bad. So it's going to need some work, but that's no big deal. We'll take it back over to the workbench and see if we can turn it around. So there's clearly something not quite right with the drive. In any case, we'll try to open this thing up and see if we can figure out what exactly is going on with it. I suspect this screw right here and this screw right here have something to do with opening it up, but I've never opened this type of locomotive up before, so I'm not 100% certain if this is correct or not, but we'll try it anyway. All right, there we go, and wow, I gotta say, this is very different from what I usually work on. Look at this old fabric insulated wiring. It's nothing short of a miracle, too, that light actually works. I mean, the wires going to that are just ridiculously thin. But yeah, overall, a pretty simple design. Commutator looks like it could use some cleaning, but interestingly enough, this all looks like it's turning just fine. Yeah, that motor is super loose. That's probably why the locomotive was doing some funny things. I think it's just because, this shouldn't really be able to turn, because when it does, it's probably maybe binding with the gear a little bit. Well, I think that is all looking a lot better now, so I think we can start to focus on figuring out why the motor is so loose. So I'll open up this bottom part here. I'll also be able to have a look at the bearings and everything else, see how much grease is inside here. Yeah, overall it doesn't look horrible. I mean, it's not spotless, but also far from the worst I've seen. Wow, what a highly unusual design, at least in comparison to what I've seen in the past. At least we've got that out so we can work on the rest of it. I'm gonna throw all these little screws in a parts tray just so I don't lose them though. There we go. That might be the culprit of our problem. Yeah, super loose. Doesn't matter because I'm gonna remove this just so we can clean this part out properly. Well, I think at this point we can start reassembling everything, so I guess I'll reinstall this part back onto the motor. So one thing I've noticed about this model is that this gear has not been attached evenly, or maybe is uneven, because when you turn it, you see this bottom one turns straight, but this top one is kind of wobbly. So it seems to all be turning okay, so I don't think that this is a huge problem, and I don't really want to mess with it too much because I'm kind of concerned that whatever caused this might be because the shaft is maybe not the right size for this gear, and if I mess around with it, I might end up making it worse. But this very well could be the reason this engine is so loud, because that definitely would cause some vibration and things like that. So that's just one thing I noticed. So it seemed like the components on the front truck were not lubricated terribly well, which as far as cleaning goes is a really good thing. It's just lucky that whoever had this engine before me didn't run it much, otherwise these gears would have all worn down very, very quickly. So at this point, the model's almost completely back together. The only things I want to attend to are first getting this thing soldered back to here, which is where I believe it originally went. I'm also a little bit concerned about how well this piece of rubber works as a drive link between the two trucks, and I highly suspect it could be causing that vibration issue, so if I can find something to replace that, it would be good. But for now, we'll focus on the soldering. I would like to note that somebody did send in a high-end soldering iron recently, and I fully intend to use that at some point. However, for this purpose, we're working with a very large piece of metal, which I think is going to be tricky to get to the right temperature. And the soldering iron which was sent in, I believe, is a lower wattage than my current one, so I'm just going to use my larger one here, because even with this, I think it's going to be challenging getting the solder to flood properly. Yeah, it's amazing. Even with a 100-watt soldering iron, I was not able to get the solder to fully flood. It does seem to be holding on, but I don't know. We'll have to see how that holds. I'm going to try to use a small piece of magnet wire to organize the wiring in here a little bit. Well, I think at this point we can pack the engine away. I'm not going to put the screws in yet though, because I highly suspect this thing is going to have some problems. But there's only one way to find out, so let's take it over to the track and see what happens. Alright, moment of truth. Alright, that doesn't seem bad. Let's see, how does it go forwards? Not bad. Well, it seems to be running pretty well so far. Let's see if we can make it an entire lap. It's certainly a lot quieter than it was. Yeah, what a great locomotive. So I think I can bring this thing back over to the workbench. I'll throw the screws back in it, and I also have a matching B unit for this thing I'd like to link up somehow. So I just cut up this piece of metal right here and drilled a couple holes in it so that we could try to make some sort of a linkage between the A and B unit. So I'm going to try to install that right now. Well, I think that will work. Well, I think that just looks absolutely rocking. Now let's take a first spin. Well, folks, I think that's going to be about it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. I am absolutely thrilled with the results of this kind of repair. You know, this engine was technically running, but not terribly well, and now it's running well enough to even pull its B unit and probably a few cars once I find a good coupler for it. So yeah, I'm very happy with that. But with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching.